and welcome to Mythmakers. Mythmakers is the podcast for fantasy fans and fantasy creatives, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. My name is Julia Golding. I'm an author, but I also run the activities of our centre. And today I am joined from the Bay Area in the US by a wonderful new writer, or new to me. We'll hear more how long she's been in the writing game. But that is Hayley Dennings, and I have here to share with you a wonderful, you see, look at this, production values of her new book, This Ravenous Fate. So Hayley, as a way of introducing yourself to us all, do you want to tell us about what were your favourite fantasy reads as you were growing up?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting. It's been lovely getting to meet you and getting to know you. For my favorite fantasy works growing up, I read so much, but I think definitely one of the more formative series when I was like really little were the Warriors Cats books, which I guess like, I don't know if you would consider them technically fantasy. Like, yeah, they're like,
completely. Yeah.
Cat.
Yeah.
But I love like the kind of world building and like the clan dynamics there. So those were definitely my first like introduction to fantasy. And then I think the Hunger Games like really got me into like the sci-fi fantasy space. So I realized like how much you could do with like, you know, incorporating like social issues and interesting commentary. And that book has, I feel like it's timeless. Like I still love it so much. And obviously she's still expanding on the world, but yeah, those are definitely my favorites, but there's so many. I feel like I could talk forever.
No, but that's really helpful because you're obviously from a younger generation. And I remember the Hunger Games when it came out, but as a book more that my children were reading, and of course the follow on with the films, which took a slightly different track to the books, didn't they? I think, as is one of these things. Are you a fan of the film series, or are you a book purist?
I really, really like the films as well. I think especially like Catching Fire. I feel like everyone thinks that that's like the best book to movie adaptations. It's just so good. But I mean, yeah, the books are still my favorite. But I remember like being so excited when I was in middle school. I was like counting down the days for when the first movie came out. And it still is like, they're great to watch now. So I love both.
Fantastic. So that's covered my second question, which is really about what books had influence on you. And it sounds as though The Hunger Games has been your sort of, I don't know, your totemic book that you keep going back to. And for me, that's the kind of Tolkien is that for me. So tell us how you managed to get published, because that is no easy feat. So what was the path that you took? I've had the benefit of reading your acknowledgements at the end, so I've got an idea, but perhaps you'd like to share with us how your journey from the first idea to actually having your book out there.
Yeah, so I feel like my journey was like traditional, but like a little not traditional, because I've like been online in these online spaces, like being a bookish influencer, I guess some people would say. Like I really just got on there and I just love to talk about my favorite books. So I don't even like see myself as that. But yeah, so I feel like I kind of built a community, and just one day I decided I really wanted to get into the writing community specifically. And that's where I found like so many other writers. I learned that like this is where people, you know, learn about like agents and different publishers. And I've been wanting, like, it's always been my dream to be a published author. So I feel like I probably know more than like the average person who like isn't, you know, trying to achieve this goal. But yeah, so like definitely like joining Twitter was really helpful. I remember like the first day that I tweeted about my idea for This Ravenous Fate, my agent now, like she liked my tweet. And I remember like freaking out because I had just watched an interview with her like a few weeks before. And I was like, that's my dream agent. I was like, I need her to work with me because she's amazing. And then she like knew about me and I was like, that's crazy. And so, yeah, I just continued to like talk about my journey on Twitter, and I got like a lot of interest from editors and agents. There would be some who like messaged me asking to like read my book before I was even done with it. And I was like, oh, this is like a real thing. Cause at this point, This Ravenous Fate was the 5th book that I had written. So I was like, okay, I think this time I actually need to like try to get this one published. All my friends were like, you need to stop stalling. Like, this is the one. And all the interest from the professionals like in the industry, I was like, hey, yeah, it's real. So I did that. And then one of my mentors and friends, Jen Ferguson, she messaged me about this opportunity with We Need Diverse Books. It's like a revision workshop for Black creatives. And I applied for that and I got in. So I spent like the summer revising my book. And at this point, there was like a couple agents who were like waiting to read my book. And I was like, oh my God, the pressure's on. Like, I actually need to make this book good. And I need to, actually get it out there one day. And I decided to participate in a Twitter pitch competition called DV Pit. And that's, I think, when I got like the most interest and when people were like really excited and it felt really real. And then a little bit after that, I queried, got my agent, and then we went on sub, got my book deal. So yes, it was like a long process, but also people can be on sub or in the query trenches for a long time. So I'm really lucky that for me, it did not last that long. And I think honestly, I just tried to use like a lot of the resources I had at hand, like social media and like being able to show publishers and agents that there were people interested in my book definitely really helped. But it was a long process. Like that was my fifth book. For a long time, I didn't think that it was going to happen because the book right before then, I tried to send it to a revision workshop and it was rejected. And I was like, well, maybe I'm just not meant to be a writer. Like maybe this is not for me. And then the book I decided to write after that was This Ravenous Fate. And now it's coming out in 2 weeks. So it all worked out.
And congratulations. Brilliant.
Thank you.
By the time this is broadcast, I think your book will be out. So that will be, you'll be able to, if you're listening to this, you don't have to wait 2 weeks. You'll be able to get it now, which I strongly encourage you to do so. It was interesting listening to you talking about having written 4 other books first. I've just been recommending the Neil Gaiman talk. He gave the Tolkien at 50 talk at Oxford just recently in the summer. And he quoted Ray Bradbury, the science fiction writer, saying every writer has a million bad words to get out of them before they're ready to be published. I don't know if that's strictly true, but it's quite a nice thought for those of you who have been round this circle of being rejected, that actually maybe that's just some of your million that you need to get out your system before you get the book that has the excitement around it. Okay, so tell us a little about this wonderful idea you've had, This Ravenous Fate. It's a bit like your elevator pitch, but tell us what we would be reading if we pick it up or listen to it, or however we have our books these days.
Yeah, so I call This Ravenous Fate my sapphic vampire book because it follows a vampire and a vampire hunter in 1920s Harlem who are forced to work together to solve a mysterious string of murders that might be connected to a cure for vampirism, which in the book I call it Reaperhood. They're called Reapers. And yeah, it's young adult historical fantasy, lots of blood and intrigue and crime and yearning because the main characters are childhood friends that turned into enemies and now must grapple with all the shared history between them while having to work together to defeat a greater evil. So it's a lot. It's dark, but full to the brim of like a lot of Black history that I think is really important to kind of resurface, because the main reason I wrote this book was because I felt like there are a lot of parts of our history that are kind of brushed over, and the Harlem Renaissance was one of those things. Hugely like celebrated time period where Blackness was really celebrated. And I feel like a lot of times when Black history is brought up or taught, at least like in my classrooms where I went to school, it was always a focus on our trauma. So I've always been really fascinated with the Harlem Renaissance and how it's like a celebration of Blackness. And, but I still obviously when writing the book wanted to be honest to, everything going on during that time. But it was really fun to get to explore the fun parts of, the expansion of the culture and all the things that Black people were accomplishing. So yeah, that's my long pitch.
No, that's great. I don't know much about the Harlem Renaissance other than the occasional film. Particularly recently, there's been a few films about that period, but a lot of it was new to me. It was great to read. But picking up on the theme of Blackness, the first thing that struck me is your dedication, where you dedicate it to Black girls, you are enough. And I love that. Of course you are. You're more than, exactly. I don't want any, that's just wonderful dedication. I loved it. But it made me think about your choice to have all the main characters from within the Black community in Harlem. Am I right in connecting the dedication to that choice? Because I can imagine a world of like central casting or publishers saying, well, it's all very well having these strong Black characters, but let's also include for diversity, a white character or a Asian character, a main character, because you do have these characters there, but not as the main characters. Am I right that there is a connection between this enough to be these characters from this world? You don't have to do a sort of social engineering of balance.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think like it's interesting. My dedication, I like thought really long and hard about it for a long time because I was like, this is my first book and I want it to obviously be something meaningful. So I was like, I need to do something like really artsy or whatever. And then I was like, no, what is the main message that I want for this book? It's that I want people who look like me, like when I was younger and I didn't have books that had people who look like me in them. I want them to know that their stories matter and, they are heard, they're seen and, they're loved. So that definitely was a large part of it. And I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned that because like growing up, when I first started writing, I didn't write about Black people or Black girls. I wrote about white characters because I didn't know that I could write about Black people because all the books that were around me, like at my school and my libraries, like they had people that didn't look like me. So I didn't know it was possible for someone who looked like me to be a hero or like even the villain or like any part of the story. So that was really important to me whenever I set out and I actually started writing my own books. My mom, like one day, I think she read one of my stories when I was younger and she was like, why don't you write a Black girl? And I was like, I didn't know I could do that. So that changed my life. And then
you've gone one step further though, because there was a stage, particularly if you look back at Hollywood films, there was the stage, the cringy stage of the Black best friend. The sort of the awareness was growing in the casting people that you needed to include a more diverse, but it ended up being, we can't make it the main character, we'll make it the best friend. So High School Musical, for example, is a sort of classic example of that. But you've just said, right, let's not, in the same way as we read books which might have a kind of all white cast, like the original version of the Harry Potter stories, you just think, fine, that's how it is. And in your way, you're also normalizing the fact that you don't have to, you can get past that. Of course, there is a theme of Blackness in it, but it's just, they're just the characters.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Past the labels. They're wonderful, wonderful characters. So thank you for doing that. It was great. Also, we should mention that the other sort of marginalized, coming more into the center sort of theme is that of a same-sex attraction, because your two characters are from both women, both girls. Mm-hmm. So I'm imagining it's important to you that you see more stories to allow people to think of same-sex attraction stories. Is that,
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
Yeah, 100%. Honestly, I just even from my own identity to just queerness is a big part of my life. And I think that I feel like a lot of times in publishing, they usually allow one marginalization. They're like, you can be Black or you can be gay. But if you're both, that's too much. So for this book, I was just like, no, I want to tell a story that feels the most real and natural to me. And there are a lot of different components to this for me, but at the heart of the story, I was like, it's two girls who have a really intense relationship. And so I always knew it was going to be between them because it was kind of based on feelings that I had surrounding my own friendship breakup, which as I've been in this community and been promoting my book and talking about a friendship breakup, I've realized I'm this is a really big thing in queer, specifically sapphic communities where they have an intense relationship with their friend. And then, the feelings are a bit confusing, especially when you're younger. And so that's really interesting for me to get to explore, especially for a younger audience where feelings and emotions are so big and even the littlest things that happen feel like it's the end of the world. And then I think also like specifically for like vampire literature, Carmilla is one of the first like well-known vampire books. And that book is supposed to be like a warning against homosexuality and specifically like lesbianism. The vampire is seen as a monster who's like tempting the main character and corrupting her. And so getting to write this book, that's kind of like a response to that and saying that that's not the case. And it's okay if, you know, you're queer and you're different. It doesn't make you a monster, but it's also really important to me as well. So yeah, getting to write that and like feel completely free. And like you said, like normalizing it. So it's not, you know, just someone picks up this book and it's like, this is like a Black lesbian book. Like I can read it for diversity or whatever. No, like this is just a book that anyone can read and just like have fun with and see themselves in.
I kind of was, I sort of wondered if I even should ask these questions because I was thinking I so much more read about vampirism really and intense friendships, but I thought the identity thing is there, and I thought, well, I need to ask you. It's a bit like, you know, otherwise it would be odd. But I do want to stress that in case someone listening to this has got the wrong end of the stick, being a vampire isn't equated to being queer at all. It's just that friend has fallen to this reaperdom. It's not to do with her sexual identity. It's just this other, she could have been anything. I don't want to make people think that there's a connection there. Right. So let's turn to Vampire Story, which is great fun. So this cuts across the racial tensions of the era because anyone become a Reaper. And let's think more about your characterization of the interwar jazz era. Can you want to talk a little bit more about what you like about the vampire presence in that era? Because it seems to be a really good fit because of all the sort of like the seediness and the speakeasies. And anyway, over to you because you're at this.
Yeah, no, I love that question. All these questions have been so good. But I mean, I just, like you said, I think it just fit the aesthetic very well. And when I was like doing research on the Harlem Renaissance and the 1920s, so much of the time, one of the lines that like stuck out to me a lot is like, this is one of the most morally corrupt periods of US history. And I was like, yeah, like this is so fascinating. There's so much like bad stuff going on in the shadows and like still things that like the government is trying to hide and that, you know, people don't want to teach kids about in history class. And so that was really interesting to me. I really wanted to lean into the darkness aspect. So I thought it would be cool to kind of have these like contrasting aesthetics of like the glitz and the glamour, but then also like kind of the blood and the shadows that are kind of, you know, lurking amongst all that decadence. And so vampires definitely fit into that because I think vampires, like when you look at them, like they look pretty human, at least like some of them, you know, depending on the lore that you believe in. But then like you get to know them or like you look closely or you let them bring you into the shadows and they turn out to be something incredibly dangerous and, you know, violent. And I just thought it was like a really interesting imagery and like a theme to follow because I think like for so much of US history specifically, the US has tried to like make itself seem like it's this great place of dreams where people can come and like achieve all their dreams and be successful and like be happy. But there are all these things that they kind of like brush under the rug, these terrible, terrible things that they've done to like marginalized communities. And I just thought like, I want to tell that story where it's honest about, you know, how great the US seems on the outside. But then when you really get into it, there are a lot of terrible things lurking beneath. And I feel like the Harlem Renaissance is perfect for that because, yeah, there's this great migration where Black people are going to the North to like get a better life for themselves. But like, that's not an easy fix. Like they're still having these struggles. They are still left out and having to, you know, make a lot of sacrifices to even make a living. And so, yeah, I think it just like fit the aesthetic perfectly. And I saw someone else online talking about how like the rise in vampire fiction is kind of correlated with the, I guess, like our state of like how we feel nowadays with like the economic decline and just overall like how things are kind of terrible in the world. And I was like, yeah, that's really interesting because I think horror as a genre has always been a really great way to reflect how society is feeling. And so, yeah, getting to dive into that with vampires, using that as a way to kind of depict this like hidden aspect of US history and, you know, how it spreads kind of like a poison, like anti-Black racism in US and intergenerational trauma within Black communities. I feel like it was just the perfect way to explore that. I think monsters in general and immortality is a great way to look at humanity through a new lens that kind of reveals these new aspects.
Yeah, because if you think about well, I mean, obviously the vampire's an old story, but when it started coming into literature, it started around at the time of Byron, and there was a feeling of the sort of gentleman vampire at that stage. And it's associated with feudalism. And then you go on to the Bram Stoker version of Dracula. So it's looking at a sort of fear of women, the vampire brides. It's the fear of sexual sexuality in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the sort of unbridled passion of the vampire. In a way, our modern vampires are relatively tidied up in the sort of vampire fiction that you get in Christina Freeland and all that. So they seem quite good guys. Well, they very often they split them into two sorts. There's the kind of sexy ones who are not devolved, and there's the devolving sort. So there's this sense of the breakdown of the human body quite often. So it's fascinating the number of different, as you say, we keep reinventing the vampire and loading onto it all sorts of stuff. Thinking about the historical moment, you've said some fascinating things already about the jazz era, but I was wondering, were there any specific historical figures who lie behind some of your characters that perhaps we don't, particularly me sitting here in the UK, people we wouldn't have heard of, that are ones you want to acknowledge or point us to find more out about after this?
There honestly is, I didn't really base any of my characters off of real people. And this is kind of where it got hard for me doing the historical part, because obviously I wanted to like remain true to history, but at the same time, it's like fantasy and there's a lot of stuff happening that didn't actually happen. And I kind of struggled with knowing like how to balance that. But all of my characters are like very original. Like Leila and Elise are their own people. I would say probably like Stephen is more so based on, you know, the rich like socialites at the time. No one really specific, but then also like for the politicians, I did try to do more research on like the political state at the time and like what people were valuing. And so, yeah, a lot of that. I didn't really base anyone on real historical figures just because I'm like so specific about my characters. And I was like, I don't want to like get anything crossed here. But there's definitely some inspirations.
I meant more that I don't know, maybe some of the singers or whatever of the period. I had a Billie Holiday soundtrack in my head. I don't know if that's a bit late, but that's what was.
Yeah, no, there are definitely like some, I guess you would call them like cameos for some characters, like more in the background, like Alan Locke. I think he was mentioned. If the line wasn't cut, I don't remember if it was. And then there's like some descriptions of like jazz music for a singer. I don't know. I'm like blanking on what her name is, but there's like a whole like line about like her singing, and it's like Layla's walking past a club where she's supposed to be performing. And then there are lines about like writers being in the background, like, you know, picking up on the gossip, writing down inspiration for stories is supposed to be a call out to like Zora Neale Hurston. So yeah, there's definitely some references there, but I don't know. I think like I'm so weird with historical because I'm like, I have like more of a focus on the places, I think, than the actual people. And so I more so wanted to focus on like the contributions that the people made and like how I could incorporate that and like their movements into the story rather than like the people themselves. But there's definitely like some inspiration there, of course, because they have huge influence over the time period. But yeah, really love that question.
Yeah. So the Cotton Club, I've heard of as a name. And am I right in thinking that's a real place? Yeah, yes. Good. I was just slightly worried. I was uneducated about the Harlem Renaissance. I'm trying to get my facts right. Okay, so I was going to say, I just wanted to point out what amazing prose writer you are. Because when I first picked up this book, It's got some cover quotes, which wouldn't immediately entice me into it because I'm slightly squeamish. I am, not slightly. So things that say sweetly vicious, I think, oh, will my delicate sensibilities be able to cope? And I totally did cope because you just write so beautifully. And have you had some creative writing training, or is this just because you read a lot and you've absorbed and developed your own style? Tell us a little bit about how you write and your approach to style, your voice, I suppose.
Well, first of all, thank you. That's very nice. And like, I don't know, whenever I see people compliment my prose, I'm always kind of shocked because I feel like that's not one of my strengths.
It is.
So thank you. It's been amazing hearing that feedback. And honestly, yeah, I think it's just because I read a lot, because like I love like beautiful prose. So I tend to gravitate more towards writers and books that have that. And I love to like study them. I love poetry. So that's another thing that I think would definitely have influenced my writing. I was an English and French major in college. And English has always been my favorite subject. I wanted to do creative writing, but they like didn't have that at my school. So I couldn't really do it. So I don't know if I was like specifically trained in creative writing, more so like literature analysis and stuff like that. But I would say that absolutely helped me as well, like reading outside of the usual genres that I read and like learning the various different types of like writing, sentence structure, all of that has influenced me a lot. And like, as for my writing process, I don't know, I'm very much a plotter. So I have to have everything planned out. When I first came up with the idea for this book, I think one of the first things that came to me was the ending for the entire duology. So always known how the story is going to conclude. And that definitely helped me like write everything going out to there, like figuring out the theme that I want running through the whole story. And also like how I want my prose to, fit the setting. And I think specifically for this book, I was like, this time and aesthetic is so specific. So I feel like my prose needs to match that in a way. And I remember I read Jazz by Toni Morrison, and she talked about having a similar thought and how she wanted her writing style to be reminiscent of the energy of the time. And I was like, I don't know how she succeeded in doing that. Obviously, Toni Morrison, the mind of a mastermind. But yeah, again, but that's just like, that's what I do for my writing is I feel like I have to read really far and like do all this research and like really understand how I want the full like style and like emotions and vibes of the book to come out. Cause it really is like more than just the pitch and the aesthetic, but it's really down to like the specific word you use. And so, yeah, that really is my process, but I am also a perfectionist. So in edits, I'm constantly tweaking things and trying to make sure that it reads right. So I'm glad that you found it to be really nice and that other people do as well, because that tells me that I did a good enough job.
You certainly did. And I agree about the perfectionism. I have that. I just did the very last round of edits on a book that's coming out in October. And I was looking back at my email and I'm talking about the placement of a comma in one line. I'm thinking they'll be getting that, thinking, gosh, she's so, go away. But anyway, it mattered to me. So I thought I'd mention it. So do you have... Oh, I should ask you before I ask you for your fantasy tip, but you mentioned it's a duology. Have you finished part 2? And is there a publication date for part 2?
Yeah, we don't have the exact date yet. I've written the first draft and I'm currently doing my edits. We're aiming for an August 2025 release. Right. So I guess as long as I can finish these edits on time, hopefully that'll still be the case. But yeah, book 2 is a lot. It's very hard. Like I've talked to a lot of writers and they're all like, book 2 is the worst. Like you're going to have the worst time. And I was like, no, it's fine. It's just a sequel. Like I'm just continuing what I already have. No, it's been really hard, but it is a lot of fun, kind of bittersweet because obviously I have to say goodbye to these characters, but I don't know. I think duologies are so perfect in like length and like story arcs. So it's been really cool and like a fun challenge getting to really test my skills and how I can make sure these characters are developed, their relationships are developed, and that I give everyone an ending that is worthy and good. So it's been a lot, but I'm getting through it.
Well, that sounds great. I look forward to part 2. So going back to what I mentioned about a fantasy tip, this could be something you've read, something you've watched, or just something that came to you whilst you were writing your own fantasy, something you think would help an aspiring writer.
Yeah.
I picked up a few tips along the way, like read Toni Morrison.
Yes.
I mean, I'm hoping people are making notes. But is there anything else that perhaps you've watched recently or read recently that made you look again at your own writing?
Yeah, honestly, I think the number one thing that's helped me is going outside of writing and studying like story structures of other stories that you really, really love and just understanding what they do and why it works for you. So for me, Arcane on Netflix is, I think, like probably the most brilliant show ever. And anytime I see any part of it, I'm just constantly inspired by, the way that they've laid everything out. And like the next season is coming out, literally just the trailer is a piece of art. So I think like, I don't know, whenever people say like, you should read a lot. Yes, I agree. Like read Toni Morrison. I think everyone should read Toni Morrison because she's brilliant. But I think it's also important to get into other mediums because there's so many different ways to tell a story. And if you can learn a lot from other genres. Like I always say that horror and horror tropes are so fascinating and smart in the way that they are able to depict certain themes and issues. And so I always kind of slip like little horror things into my books, like no matter, well, not like a romance book, but like my fantasy books for sure have like a lot of horror aspect. And I'm aware that like not everyone's going to want to do that. But I think just looking at the way that they use certain like genre conventions or tropes is really, really helpful. So that's always my number one tip. Read broadly and widely, but also like, don't be afraid to take time to like watch stuff as well. Like animated things, TV shows, movies, also like listen to music, read poetry. That's like my number one thing I would say, poetry and other genres outside of what you're writing for sure.
Thank you. That's a great tip. Right. So just a little bit of fantasy imagination now. We always end with where in all the fantasy world is the best place for something. And we've covered quite a few, best wood, best tavern, best library, and so on. And I thought it'd be quite fun to choose any fantasy universe where you have something of an underground club, like a speakeasy. And it doesn't actually have to exist already in that fantasy world, but you can just like, I don't remember there being one in Wind in the Willows, but we could put one in there just for the fun of it. Where would you like to open up your speakeasy and throw open the doors for people to come in?
I love this question. And I feel like I have two different answers.
Well, they give different two. Yeah. Okay.
All right. So first I want to say like the world of Arcane, because I think especially the Undercity, like Zon, they kind of have stuff like a speakeasy, but that's why I think it would be very fitting. People can walk in and there's like a lot of corrupt, crazy stuff going on. And I think it would be very fitting. But then I also want to say something in the world of like Spirited Away, which I know like the aesthetics aren't the same, but I think that's why it's so fascinating, because maybe if I opened up a speakeasy there, people would, for once, at least in my world, have a break and be able to relax. I think the world of Spirited Away is very beautiful. And it would be so interesting to like see the contrast of like a speakeasy versus like the spirit world and Spirited Away and all the creatures that are frequenting those. So yeah, that's my answer.
I really loved Spirited Away just because they're so different, all the creatures and the sort of the quietness of some of the moments, like when she's sitting on the bus or train, whatever it is. I just love that. Yeah, it's got a real poetry to it. I think I would open my speakeasy in Alice's Wonderland. I mentioned this to you in advance because I think that most of Alice happens during the daytime and everyone needs somewhere to go at night. And I think having all those characters like the Mad Hatter, he seems to fit right in at the bar. He wouldn't leave. He wouldn't go back to his tea party. And the hare and the dormouse. In fact, they feel like customers already. I can just sort of and you could get the Duchess or the Red Queen singing at being her diva. Yeah, no, I think that'd be great fun. So my speakeasy is in Alice in Wonderland.
Well, I'd love to see that now. That sounds amazing.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Hayley. And we look forward to reading. Well, This Ravenous Fate is out now by the time this podcast goes out. But also we look forward to part 2. Has that got a title? What's part 2 called?
It does, but I don't think I'm allowed to share it.
Ooh, to be confirmed, part 2, but it's written, so we know you don't have to worry that it won't ever complete. So it's on its way. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us on Mythmakers.
Thank you for having me. I had the best time, and it was lovely getting to talk to you. And yeah, I'm excited.
Thanks for listening to Mythmakers podcast, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. Visit oxfordcenterforfantasy.org to join in the fun. Find out about our online courses, in-person stays in Oxford, plus visit our shop for great gifts. Tell a friend and subscribe wherever you find your favourite podcasts worldwide.